Hello, my name is Gail Brown, and I will be doing for my Black History Moment the Underground Railroad and its codes. Many of us have learned about the Underground Railroad and the network of secret paths that slaves used to escape freedom. It has remained as one of the most fascinating examples of bravery and resistance in American history. And yet, many of us know little about how it actually functioned. How did fugitive slaves know which way to go? How did the people communicate across hundreds of miles without the internet? During slavery, restrictions were placed on African Americans to maintain their dependency on whites. White masters and overseers used this technique to avoid any overthrow of the plantation caste system. The limited literacy among blacks was thought to pose a problem for communication in black culture with slaves. The limited literacy also among blacks was thought to pose a problem for communication. But however, the slaves emphasized the oral tradition of stories and songs to maintain an identity separate from their property. The slaves' oral tradition comprised of coded messages cloaked in songs and stories. They were generally thought harmless and were often overlooked by white masters and overseers, basically because they were talking about the Bible. Part of the answer lies in music. Since it was illegal to teach slaves to read or write in most southern states, songs coded with secret messages were used to convey information about the route to the north. Songs were used in everyday life by African slaves. Singing was tradition among the African slaves, and singing served many purposes, such as providing repetitive rhythms for repetitive manual work, inspiration, and motivation. Singing was also used to express their values and solidarity with each other, and during celebrations. Songs were used as tools to remember and communicate, since the majority of slaves could not read. Some songs gave directions about when, where, and how to escape, while others warned of danger along the way. Harriet Tubman, who was known by many as Moses, used music to communicate with travelers. In fact, she's a key figure in many of the songs of the time. For example, when the sun comes back and the first quail calls, following the drinking gourd, the old man is awaiting for you to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking gourd. This is one of the best examples of a map song. This map contains essential directions for slaves trying to escape. The first line refers to the beginning of spring, when the days are longer, which was the best time for them to set out the journey. The second and most famous clue is the drinking gourd, which refers to the Big Dipper constellation. By following the line of the constellation to the north, travelers had a guide in the night sky that pointed them toward freedom. Songs could also express emotions in the same way that poetry and drama do. For example, Africans who wanted to escape slavery, songs had another important purpose as well. They could be used to communicate. Their songs, which are sometimes called spirituals, were passed from one group to another, and along with the songs came the code. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Who are those children all dressed in red? God's gonna trouble the water. Must be the ones that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, which used biblical imagery to evade suspicion, was used by Harriet Tubman to tell fugitive slaves how to avoid capture. If they thought they were being followed, hiding in the water would conceal them and throw the bloodhounds off their scent. Moses refers to Tubman herself, who led hundreds of slaves into the freedom on the Underground Railroad. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming forth to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming forth to carry me home. If a slave heard this song in the South, they knew they had to prepare for escape. The band of angels referred to the conductors of the Underground Railroad, Sweet Chariot, who would soon come south, swing low, to guide the slave to the north freedom, carry me home. Harriet Tubman and other slaves used songs as a strategy to communicate with slaves in their struggle for freedom. Songs used biblical references and analogies of biblical people, places, and stories, compared them to their own history of slavery. For example, being bound for the land of Canaan for a white person could mean ready to die and go to heaven, but to a slave it meant to go to Canada. Steal away. This song communicates that a person singing it is planning to escape. Steal away, steal away. Steal away to Jesus, steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here. My Lord calls me, he calls me by the thunder, the trumpet in it, my soul. I ain't got long to stay here. My Lord calls me, he calls me by the lightning, the trumpet sounded in my soul. I ain't got long to stay here. This song was telling them just how long they got to stay and how quickly they had to go, by the light, by the thunder, and whatever. And they always had Jesus and the Lord with them. So although that these songs were many and plentiful in there, they always had a code. And one of the things that was so important, and many historians will argue that they don't really believe that these songs were codes, but many of the slaves would say, yes, they were. This is how we got to freedom. And so nonetheless, we can surely see what each of these mean to those who were using the Underground Railroad. These were important sources for them to get to the north. That is all for this moment of history.